All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm James Ward. I'm a platform evangelist at Salesforce. So this session is going to be about reinventing our app developer lifecycle with continuous delivery on Heroku. So we'll dive right in. I love it when people ask me questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to stop me at any time, raise your hand, and we'll get those answered as I go. So this conference, Trailhead X, is all about the App Cloud, and there's a bunch of different components of the App Cloud, and today we're going to be drilling into one piece in particular, and that's going to be Heroku. And then we'll talk about, at the end, how we can bring together Heroku and Salesforce. So that's where we're headed. Real quickly, the different components of the App Cloud. There's Force.com. This is model-driven development. How many people here are Force.com developers? Okay, great. And then there's Heroku and Heroku Enterprise. How many people here have used Heroku before? Okay, good. So a lot of people new to Heroku, so I get to start at the beginning, so that's great. There's the App Exchange, Lightning, Thunder. Thunder's really exciting. I just started playing with it. It's a big data platform. Allows us to do real-time streaming and event aggregation and analyzation and stuff. So some really fun stuff coming down the pike with Thunder, but that's a different talk for later. And of course, Trailhead. So that's the App Cloud. One of the questions that I get most often about the App Cloud is, when should I use Heroku, when should I use Salesforce, and when should I use them together? And so I'm going to try to answer that by talking about really what that looks like to me is it depends. It really does depend, because it depends on your developer skill sets. It depends on what you're building. It depends on who you're building it for. So there's never like a single answer that I can give, like always do it this way. But to give you an idea of the spectrum of things in the platform, when you're on the Heroku side of things, you're building things with open source toolkits. You're using things like Java or Ruby or Python or PHP or Node.js, and you're building things essentially from scratch. You're using the library ecosystems that exist for those tools. When you move into the Force.com side, that's where you're using the App Exchange, you're using the component model of Lightning, you're using Apex to write the code. And so choosing between these two, one of the factors is, what are the developers that are going to be building these apps, what do they know? What are they comfortable with? Are they comfortable with Java? Are they comfortable with Apex? Are they comfortable with doing declarative development in Force.com? Because there is no declarative development when you're on the Heroku side. So there's definitely a spectrum of different ways that you would build things. On the Heroku side, the scale of what Heroku can support is in the tens of millions, billions of users, that sort of scale. I do a lot of demo apps that have like 2 users, and so you can scale all the way from my little demo apps all the way up to the Lyft type app that's doing tons of real-time data processing, tons of real-time users, really heavy CPU requirements and network requirements. And so that's where Heroku really shines, is when you have tons of load, you plan on building something. But that's not the only place that you would use it, because as I said, I build a lot of demo apps that there's 2 users, me and somebody else that reads my blog, and I'm using Heroku for some of that stuff because I'm using tools that I'm familiar with. So then on the other end of the spectrum is the out-of-the-box app, like Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, those sorts of things. And so this is the spectrum. But what I love about the App Cloud is that we take this whole ecosystem, this whole spectrum of things, and we can put it all together to deliver those customer-centric applications, those applications that have a really high-scale customer-facing side, something that's pixel perfect, created by really hardcore CSS ninjas. And then we can have the back-end data processing, business logic, the business processes, the back-office business processes, those sorts of things. So we have this great ecosystem that we can bring all together. So as I said, I'm going to be focusing more today on the Heroku side of things, and then we'll talk at the end about how we integrate Heroku with Salesforce. So Heroku Enterprise is a fairly new part of Heroku, and this is where we really started to, I think, open the doors to the Salesforce ecosystem to really jump into Heroku and start using it. And so with Heroku Enterprise, we enabled some things that the enterprises needed. So obviously, we've always been able to scale on Heroku, but there's some new things that we've added. So one of those things is increased control. So now you can, on Heroku, have an organization that's managed by your ops team, your IT team, and they can set up how many resources you're allocated as a developer for your development workspaces and set up some compliance things in those organizations. So Heroku with Heroku Enterprise is really kind of opened the doors to making this work really well in enterprise scenarios. And that can be for the customer-facing apps, but also people are building employee-facing apps, custom employee-facing apps on Heroku as well. So sometimes we say like, oh, Heroku is for customer-facing, and that definitely can be true. But it also can be used for employee-facing as well in back-office apps. So again, the answer is usually it depends. So a quick overview, if you're not familiar with Heroku, of some of the pieces of Heroku. Heroku dynos are the execution units in Heroku. So Heroku gives you a place to run your apps, and as part of that, you need something that executes an application. So a dyno is a unit of essentially a server. We don't like calling them servers because we're higher level than that, higher level construct than that. But a dyno is this thing that's going to run your application. And you can allocate as many dynos as you need to your application. You can even set things up so that dynos will be automatically allocated as you have higher demand on your application and be then shrunk back down as demand begins to fall. So dynos are that unit of execution, and every app that you create on Heroku has its own set of dynos, 1, 0 more dynos. So you can allocate that however you want. I have like 50 different apps running on Heroku, so each of those will have its own set of dynos that are used to execute the application for each of those apps. We'll talk more. You'll actually see dynos in just a few minutes. Okay, Heroku Elements. This is the next great thing about Heroku, and I want to just show you this. So if we go jump into the browser and we go to elements.heroku.com, this is essentially a catalog of a bunch of different stuff that makes Heroku great. So the first part of Elements is add-ons. And add-ons are all these different cloud services that as you're building an application, you may need something that's providing you log retention and log searching and alerts based on your logs. And so there's a bunch of different providers that you can just go provision and add that. So if we go to logging, we can see there's a bunch of different providers there. I've used Papertrail a number of times, and it's really great because if I want alerts for if I get a log statement that says error, and I want to get emailed or I want to get something posted in my Slack channel that there was an error on my application, then I can just add the Papertrail add-on. It provisions instantly. There's usually a free tier for almost all these add-ons, and then now my application has some way to notify me that there was an error. So lots of different types of add-ons. You can see there's data stores, there's monitoring tools, there's things to manage dynos and auto-scale dynos, there's security tools. So all sorts of different add-ons that are cloud services that you can provision to an application and then instantly have it available. So some really great stuff in there. A lot of these add-ons are provided by third parties, but some of them are provided by Heroku. So Heroku provides Heroku Redis, which is a really great key-value data store. There's also Heroku Postgres, a relational data store. There's now Heroku Kafka. There's Heroku Connect. So a bunch of the add-ons, or at least a handful of the add-ons, are provided by Heroku, but the majority of them are provided by third parties. The next part of Heroku Elements is buttons. And buttons, there's like thousands of apps that you can click a button and have it deploy that app into your Heroku environment. So this is a really great way to get started with Heroku. You just go find like, oh, I want to build an order management system. I guarantee there's somebody has built a sample application that can be deployed on Heroku with using Heroku button. So you can go look through that on your own. But lots of great stuff in there. Just about all the apps that I build and put on my GitHub are in Heroku button, the button catalog. Build packs is the next part of Elements. What the build pack does, and we'll talk more about this in a couple minutes, but what it does is it transitions your application from being code to being something that's executable. So that's what the build pack's job is, to do that transition. When I'm developing on my local machine, I'm essentially running a build pack or a build process that takes my code and makes it something that I can run and test locally. So Heroku has taken that idea, that build concept, and packaged it into a way that now Heroku can run the build on your application. The reason why this is important is because we want to be able to have Heroku take the source of our application, turn it into something runnable, and then run it on those dynos, those execution units for Heroku. So those are the build packs, and again, there's tons of them. A number of them are officially supported, and then there are a ton more that are just community supported as well. So Heroku doesn't directly support, let's say, Closure. Actually, we do directly support Closure. Which one we don't support? Let's find something we've never heard of here. Horse. I've never heard of Horse. Probably some strange programming language that somebody wanted to run on Heroku. And so Heroku doesn't support Horse, but somebody has built a build pack that makes it so Heroku does support Horse. So lots of great stuff in there. Okay, so that's the Heroku elements. And then the last thing you see here is a core part of Heroku is an amazing developer experience, and you'll see that as we go through. So any questions so far about some of the basics of Heroku? You'll see it all in action here in a minute. Okay, so let's keep moving. So another part of Heroku Enterprise that's really important is the ability to create these things called private spaces. Private spaces are essentially your own private Heroku. It still runs in the cloud. It still runs on Amazon. That's where Heroku runs everything. But it's in a space where now you can set network controls. You can create isolation for those apps on Heroku. And we'll talk about how that pertains to Salesforce in a little bit. So there's private spaces. One of the great things about private spaces is that we can select a bunch of different regions for where to create our private space. So some cool stuff there. Also, one of the important parts of Heroku Enterprise is integrated identity. So if you are a Salesforce user, then you're probably already managing users in Salesforce for your internal developers. And now we have a way to federate that identity on Salesforce to your account on Heroku. Typically, like I do, is I have my Heroku account and I have my Salesforce account, and the two are not connected. And in enterprise shops, we like to have one federated identity store. And so that's what this new integrated identity allows us to do. So if I were to leave the company, then they could go just deprovision me from one system, and then that would take away my access everywhere as one example for why that's useful. Okay, so those are the features of Heroku Enterprise. Okay, so now let's dive in to deploying an app so I can show you that part. So what I'm going to be deploying is the Dreamhouse web app. So you saw during the keynote today that there was an application that was Zillow, and we took that application and we created a sample version of that Zillow application that you saw in the keynote, and there's a bunch of different pieces of that sample application. If you want to get those, you can go to dreamhouseapp.io. And here you can go through and see all the different components of the Dreamhouse app. There's one here for Heroku, which is going to be a lot of the stuff that I'm going through today. And then there's all sorts of other stuff. So if you want to write a bot that runs on Heroku and connects with Facebook Messenger, you can go get the code for that. It's all up here on that dreamhouseapp.io site. So that's the resource for that. So I'm going to be working on the Dreamhouse web app. This app is a mobile web app, and it was taken from the Dreamhouse mobile source, and then I forked it and then made it so that it would work in the browser, and so that I could have this mobile web app experience for unauthenticated users that are coming to browse properties. So here's the app on GitHub. You'll see that I've forked that repository into my own space, and now I can start working on it. So now typically there'd be a team of developers that are collaborating around the source code, working together on this project. And of course I could clone this down to my local machine, work on it locally, push changes back up to GitHub. So GitHub's become a pretty typical way for teams to collaborate on changes, be able to review changes, accept changes, and those sorts of things. So what I'm going to do in Heroku is I'm going to come in here and create a brand new app. So this is in the Heroku dashboard. I signed up for a free account on Heroku, and now I can start creating apps on Heroku. So let's create a new app. And you can see that what I can do is I can select the organization. I can make it a personal app, or I can put it into this DF15 that's from last year's Dreamforce keynote organization. And so that's an enterprise, Heroku Enterprise place where now I have a team of developers and ops people and testers all configured. I'm just going to leave it my personal app space. Then we can also define if we want to put this into which region we want to put it in. Let me go back up here and actually select the keynote for 1 sec so I can show you something else. So in my runtime selection, private spaces are something that's associated with Heroku organizations and Heroku Enterprise. So if I do want to put it into a private space, I select that organization, and then I can select private space, and you'll see that I have one private space that has been provisioned in Tokyo. And so that's how we would deploy this app, not into the common runtime, which is where I'm going to deploy it, and I'm going to do it as a personal app. Instead of doing it in a private space for this demo, I'm just going to deploy it into the common runtime. So the common runtime, that is a multi-tenant system. So there's lots of different Heroku apps from different users all running in the same infrastructure. With private spaces, I get my own block of infrastructure. So that's the difference there. Okay, so let's create this brand new app. Right now, this app will have nothing in it. It's just going to be a fresh new app. You'll see that I get a name associated with it. There's this Mighty Dusk 67344. So Heroku is very creative with its naming there. It's auto-assigned it. I could, of course, give it its own name. And now I can start managing this application. The first thing I want to do is connect this app to that source code that's up on GitHub. So this is the first part of my workflow. There's a couple different ways that you can deploy an app to Heroku. But as somebody who uses GitHub for all of my source control, I want to connect Heroku to the place where my source code is. Remember how there's that build pack? Because that build pack knows how to transition from source to something that it can run on a dyno, then it's going to be able to run this application. So I'm going to connect to GitHub here. And then I'm going to search for my Dream House web app here, and I'm going to say connect. So, all right, we're all connected to GitHub. Now I can set a few different settings on this project. One of these is wait for CI to pass. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the next one down here is enable automatic deploys. And I'm going to click that to say, yep. So what this is saying is that I have a branch in my source code called master. This is kind of like your production Salesforce org. So this is where like things are essentially live. If something is in master, you're assuming that it can be deployed out to a production system. So that's what I've set up is now it's saying, okay, sure enough, every time somebody pushes a change to the master branch, I'm going to deploy that change out to this app on Heroku. And now that that's set up, let's say, all right, let's actually deploy the master branch for this application. So that's actually going out, fetching the source code from Heroku, or from GitHub, applying the build pack to that code, and then creating what Heroku calls a slug file, which is everything that this application needs to run on a dyno. So it's going to take a minute to run the build, and while that's running, let me go show you a couple other things here. So first is resources. Resources are where I can go provision the number of dynos and the types of dynos that this application will use. So if we go in, you'll see that no dynos have been created yet because the app hasn't been built, so we'll come back to that in a minute. But then there's add-ons. Remember the add-ons from the Elements catalog? So if I want to add a database like Heroku Postgres, I can just come in here and say, yep, let's provision the Hobby Dev free tier of Heroku Postgres. And now that's been provisioned, and now my app has a relational database in the cloud that it can now use. So let's go check back on our build and see how that's going. So, all right, so our build is running. This application is a Node.js application. So what it's doing is downloading the dependencies for Node, the NPM libraries that are used in this application, and then it's running the actual build, which is, in this case, a Gulp build and Ionic with some plugins to Gulp, running all that build, and then it's going to create the deployable version of this application and deploy it on a dyno. So, question? Oh, great question. Yeah, so that's magic, actually. So the question was, how did Heroku know what build pack to choose when I deployed the application? So it's actually magic. Heroku has a list of build packs that it officially supports, and what it does is it runs through all those build packs, and there's a script in each build pack called detect, and it runs that script, and if that script returns like true, then it picks that build pack. So it's actually not magic. It just is running through a list of possible options. And the way that it looks for a Node application is, do I have a package.json file in the root project directory? And if so, you're a Node application. For a Java application, it would be a pom.xml. For a Scala application, it would be a build.sbt. So every build tool essentially has these markers that we can look at and say, oh, that looks like it's going to be this type of application. You can also manually set the build pack to something else. So that's how you'd use a third-party build pack. Or if for some reason our heuristic detection is wrong, then you can override the build pack that we've specified. Question?
Yeah, I think you just answered. But
okay.
If you want to do some custom, or maybe we have multiple type of projects mixed in.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's actually something called the multi-build pack that allows you to specify multiple build packs and will run multiple build packs at the same time. And so that would be something that you would just specify manually. There's a couple different ways to specify your build pack if you're doing it manually. One of them is through a config var. If you're using a Heroku button, you can actually put into the button metadata the build pack that it should use and that sort of thing. The build pack, all the build packs are open source, and these get used across a number of different cloud providers. So Cloud Foundry uses build packs. The specification for how to write a build pack is all open, and so you can go create your own build pack. So lots of flexibility there. Okay, so it looks like our app has been deployed. Let's go check it out here in the browser. And we're just going to that Mighty Dusk URL, so that URL is available once we created the app. We can, of course, point our own domain name at this app as well. And so here's the Dreamhouse mobile web app, and I can go in here and explore the properties, and you can go see the full demonstration of the Dreamhouse demo downstairs later if you'd like. But there's our mobile web app there running on Heroku. So we went from that source on GitHub to an app up and running on Heroku, and only took a couple minutes. The next time that build runs, it'll run faster because it's cached the dependencies and stuff. So that first time, it's a little bit slower. It takes about a minute for this app. Okay, so that's our app up and running on Heroku and set up to auto-deploy. Let's go back into the resources so you can see the dyno resources for this app. Let's refresh that, and we should see that it has one dyno currently. So if our network stays good. Okay, great. Okay, so you'll see that I'm running on the free dyno tier. I can upgrade to the hobby dyno tier, and we can go up to different size dynos and that sort of thing. I'll just leave it on the free tier. You'll see the command that it's actually running is npm start to run the web process. And we can allocate one or more web processes, or we could allocate 0 dynos to this process if we wanted. We can also have other processes in an app. So sometimes you'll have background worker processes that are like pulling things off of a queue and processing them. You can create additional processes as well, but this one just has that one web process. So how many dynos would I need to run this application? It really depends on what your application is doing, how it was built, and that sort of thing. So most people, what they'll do, before they are going to go into production, they'll do some load testing on their application to determine, like, all right, my response time with 5 dynos is this, my response time with 20 dynos is this, with this many users, I should be at 20 dynos. And then, of course, you can add a Heroku add-on that will do auto-scaling as well. So lots of different ways to manage those resources and figure out how many you need and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's our basics. We're auto-deploying from GitHub. That's all great. We have an activity log, which is great for enterprises to see exactly what user did what on this application. We can go in and check out access and see that right now I'm the only collaborator, but we could add other collaborators on this as well. In Heroku Enterprise, you can add collaborators with different privileges. Let's say you want to allow one user to view the logs, but not be able to deploy changes. You can do that in Heroku Enterprise. And then settings is where we can see config vars. You may have wondered, like, okay, this database is actually talking to this application is talking to a database, and so how is it getting its data? How did it know where to connect to? When I added that Postgres add-on to this application, it added an environment variable called database URL, and now my application is coded to look at this value, or look at that and get the value to know where to connect to get its data from. So we get our config values there. We have some info. The build pack you can see is the Node.js build pack. I can also change the build pack right here in the UI. I can add additional domains. I can transfer ownership, put it into maintenance mode, some other things there. Is there a question? No? OK. Yeah?
Is Heroku putting any kind of firewall or any layer on top of our server, or is it like if
Oh, good question. Yeah, so I didn't explain that, so thank you for bringing that up. So there is a load balancer that sits in front of all Heroku applications. And so where the connection is actually going, when I went to that application, I went to the load balancer, then the load balancer said, all right, you have one dyno, so I'm going to route the request to that one dyno. If I had 100 dynos, it would be sending requests to all 100 dynos in that application. So there is a load balancer. In terms of firewalls, yeah, Heroku's taking care of all the network security. If you want additional network security controls, then private spaces would be the way to do that. Private spaces allows you to add network isolation around your private space.
there's another thing that you take care of is CORS?
Is CORS?
So is there any built-in thing in Heroku?
There isn't a built-in way to do CORS in Heroku, but when I build an application that needs CORS, what I'll do is I'll add the CORS support to the application, or many of you probably know from Salesforce that the REST APIs do not fully support CORS. Not every REST API in Salesforce supports CORS. So I actually built a little Heroku app that proxies my API requests to Salesforce and adds the CORS headers to those requests. So you can definitely do that type of application on Heroku, and as you can tell, I've done that before. Yeah, good question. CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. It allows you to make requests from, by default, the browser does not allow you to make a request from one domain to another domain or certain types of requests. And CORS allows you to get around that restriction, but your application has to have special HTTP headers in order to do that. Yeah, one more question back there. It does, yeah, and I'll get into that next. Is how we deal with branches. So let me jump back to a couple slides and talk about continuous delivery. So continuous delivery is something that's a little more a more modern way to deliver software through services like Heroku and other cloud services. So let me walk you through what, in a nutshell, continuous delivery is. When I started building software, I had a server, and it had a web application on it written in PHP or Perl or something like that. And the way that I would make changes to that application is I would SSH into the server, and I would VI that file, make changes to that production file, and as soon as I hit save, then all of a sudden my Apache server is serving the new version of my application. So there was literally no process in how I moved from source to production. It was all like direct, right? And nice and easy, but also pretty risk prone, right? If I made a typo or something like that, then that would take down my production site. And so what we've done over the last probably 20 years is create additional processes, create like this onion of processes that we can add on top of that to give us more security to our deployments, make it safer to do deployments. And at the same time, we've been trying to make it easier to do deployments so that we can do them more quickly. So the next step was to add in a build step. And so the build step is definitely something that most applications do now. And so we have to do a compile, or we have to do some kind of build to get our source into a runnable form. So that was kind of the next step in our delivery process. So then now that we had a build process, we're like, OK, wouldn't it be great to test this application automatically before we deliver it to production? This is what's called continuous integration. And that's where we can say, all right, let's do the build, and then let's run the tests in the application to make sure that everything works. And if everything doesn't work as our tests say, then let's not deploy it to production. So that was the next layer. The next layer we could add on is, all right, instead of deploying straight to production, let's deploy to a staging environment where now I can do some manual testing of this application before I then move it to production. Then we created the Git flow way of doing things where we use pull requests. And the way that this works is, as a developer working on a team, I'm not going to be making changes in the same place or the same branch as other developers. I'm going to have my own branch where I'm making my changes, and then I'm going to say, all right, I would like to request that someone review my changes, and then if everyone is okay with those changes, then merge them into master, which is the authoritative place of production of our application. So on GitHub, this is called a pull request. You are requesting that someone pull your changes into the master branch. So that allowed us to now say, all right, changes don't go through the rest of this process until they've been through a pull request and been accepted. The next phase was to auto-test each pull request. So now every time someone proposes a pull request, before a developer even reviews it, we're going to put that through a continuous integration environment and say, please review these changes, please test these changes, continuous integration environment, and then give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if it's a thumbs up, then a developer can go and review those changes. And then once that happens and they merge them, then they're okay. Then the next step is to actually start that pull request, right, and do the auto test with a continuous integration environment, but then also take that change set, take that application in the state that the developer has it in, and deploy it onto a server, onto Heroku, and allow someone to actually manually test and check out those changes in an actual running application before they decide to merge those changes. So there's our modern continuous delivery pipeline. And as you can see, there's a lot of process there. And I would say that really it depends on how much of this process you implement, how risky is it to do a deployment. If there's little risk in doing a deployment, like for my sample applications, I'm going to skip all this and I'm going to deploy straight to production, and I'm not even going to do any testing, right? Because it's just a sample application and it doesn't really matter, right? Whereas if I'm in banking, then I want to go through this whole entire process before I push out changes to production. But this is the flow that companies like GitHub use to push changes to production hundreds of times a day. So that's a lot different than traditional enterprise where we're pushing changes like once a year. So this process definitely works at that kind of scale as well. Okay, so that's our continuous delivery process. And the way we do that with Heroku is using something called Heroku Flow. So I want to walk you through how that actually works in Heroku. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to my personal apps, and I'm going to create a new pipeline. So the pipeline is the construct to organize this flow and continuous delivery. So let's give it a name. We'll call it CW. What's the name of this app? It is Dreamhouse Web App. That's what we'll call it. Dreamhouse Web App. Okay. DHWA will be the name of my pipeline. And then I'm going to connect this up to a repository here on GitHub and hit connect. Okay, now let's create our pipeline. So now we're going to have a way to organize this flow through our continuous delivery pipeline. I need to add my staging app. So that's the one that I already created, and that was called Mighty Dusk. So let's go search for that and add it. So now I'm setting this application to be my staging app because it's auto-deploying from master. And so that's the way that I want to set up my pipeline, is to make this one auto-deploy. But I'm going to go create a new app here. Let's go back to my personal apps. I'm going to create a new app, and this is going to be my production app. So we'll call this one Dreamhouse Web App, right? And create that. So now this application, it's going to be my production application, and as part of my continuous delivery pipeline, I don't want to auto-deploy this one. I am going to add it to that pipeline that I created. So let's go and add it to that DHWA pipeline. I think that, did I click it? Yep, okay. So that'll add it to that pipeline, but I'm not going to do any auto-deployment. So there we go. There's my production app. Right now it has nothing in it, but what I can do is take my staging app, and now I can promote my staging app to production. So all I have to do is click that, and now it's going to take my staging app that was built already and deploy it to production. So that's going to take just a second. It doesn't have to rebuild it, so it doesn't have to go through that build pack process. It just can take the compiled artifact, the slug, and deploy it out. Okay, so let's go to my production app here in Heroku. And there's one thing I need to do to get this working is I need to add a database to it. So let's go to resources, and I'm going to add the Heroku Postgres add-on to this app and provision it. This app needs a database, so that's why I need that. I could share a database between staging and production if that's what I wanted to do, or I could have a different staging app that had my production database hooked to it, all sorts of different ways that I could configure that. But let's go check out our production app at dhwa.herokuapp.com, and you'll see, sure enough, here is our app with the properties. Great. So now I have my production app. I've promoted it from staging. The one thing that I'm not going to walk through but will explain for you, let's go back to our staging app, is the continuous integration part. So remember when we were setting up the GitHub auto deployment for this application, I said we'll come back to the that checkbox that I didn't check. So let's go talk about that one. So here we can see there's this checkbox that says wait for CI to pass before deploy. So I could use Jenkins, I could use Travis, I could use CodeShip, all sorts of different continuous integration systems that I could plug into this. But what I'm doing if I check that box is I'm saying don't actually do any deployment until the continuous integration environment has given me the thumbs up. Okay? So I'm gonna leave that for you to do on your own. But let's go to the next step of our pipeline. So let's go to the DHWA pipeline again. And what I'm going to do is show you the next part of this where we enable review apps. So review apps are that part of the process where I said that when somebody proposes a change, we want to test that change in an actual running application. So this would be the next phase of our continuous delivery pipeline. So let's say, all right, when someone creates a pull request, automatically create a new review app. So let's enable that. And then what we're going to do, now that review apps are enabled, we're going to go into the source code here, and I'm going to go into the client side of the application, and I'm going to make a change to this application. So this is some JavaScript code. What I'm going to change is very simple here. I'm just going to make it so that right now there's that welcome page that shows up when we load the web page. I'm going to change it so that the property list is what shows up instead. So let's paste that in there. And then instead of committing directly to master, that's what I don't want to do. That circumnavigates my process. Instead, I want to create a new branch and propose this file change. So this now allows me to create a pull request. So let's create that pull request. So now what you're seeing is there's an open pull request where I'm asking my fellow team members to review this change, and if they're okay with it, give it a thumbs up. But because there's review apps enabled, you'll see that it now, Heroku has actually said, hey, you've requested a deployment. So it's requested that I've requested that it deploy this application into Heroku, and then I can actually go see that application up and running, make sure the change is what I want before I decide to actually merge this change or before a team member decides to go merge that change. So if we go back into the pipelines console, we can actually see that it's created that review app based on the pull request, and what it will do is go through and build that application and then deploy it onto a brand new application for me, and we'll be able to test that. It's going to take a minute for that build to run like it did before. So we're going to let that run, and we'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so we've seen Heroku Flow for continuous delivery. The next thing I want to talk about is using Heroku Connect now to take this Dreamhouse mobile web application and connect it to the data that we have on Salesforce. So we have customer data in Salesforce, and that's great, because then we can build back-office business processes. If I'm the realtor, I can use Salesforce and the out-of-the-box UIs and all the Lightning components and stuff you've seen to have this really nice experience around my customer data. But in this case, I also want end users, I want my customers to be able to go view those properties on the web, and I want to have one system of record for that property data and things like who's favorited what property, those sorts of things. things. So the architecture that I'm using is I'm going to use Heroku Connect, which takes that Salesforce data and synchronizes it to a Heroku Postgres database, and then my Heroku app can read and write to that Postgres database, and then those changes can get synchronized back to Salesforce. So this gives me a really high performance, low latency way to access that Salesforce data where I don't have to worry about the limits in Salesforce and those sorts of things. Okay, so let's go give this a try and see if we can get that working. Oh, it looks like our review app has been deployed, so let's go actually check that out before we go further. So here's my new app based on my pull request, and you'll see, sure enough, the change is what I expected. It took me right into the property list page instead of taking me to the welcome page. So that's great. So the next part of that would be to go to that pull request and say, yep, let's merge that pull request. And great. So now that we've merged it, go back to the pipeline, and you'll see in a second here that the staging app will now see that there's a change on master and will automatically now deploy that change out to the staging environment, and then I could go through and promote that to production as well. So it will have to go through the build, which will take a minute, but so I won't go and watch that. Was there a question? Yep, yeah, so Heroku Connect does have a way to have different instances that you connect to. We'll see when I set up Heroku Connect how we actually associate Heroku Connect with the Salesforce org. I'll do that right now. With right. Yeah, I think there's a way to do that. Down at the Heroku booth, there's some Heroku experts, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you figure that one out. That's a good one. Okay, so let's go set up Heroku Connect for our production app. So right now it's using just a Heroku Postgres database. So this app, it knows that, all right, it knows whether or not you're connected to Salesforce and Heroku Connect or not. And when you're not connected through Heroku Connect to Salesforce, it was just going to use the Postgres database directly, but not do any synchronization to Salesforce. So what I want to do is set up synchronization with Salesforce. So let's walk through that. So I'm going to go provision the Heroku Connect add-on, and I'll do the demo free tier for that one. And then what we can do is walk through setting up Heroku Connect. So when I go to set up Heroku Connect, there's some configuration that I need to do to tell Heroku Connect what fields I want to synchronize from the app. And hopefully, yep, oh, internal server error, that's no bueno. You know it's a live demo when things don't work as expected. Okay, see if it works this time. So while we're trying to load this, I don't know if my Wi-Fi is acting weird or what, but all of the steps that you need to go through to do this on your own are all in that dreamhouseapp.io site. So if you go to dreamhouseapp.io and click on Heroku Connect, or Heroku, then it'll give you all the instructions that you need to do this on your own, and hopefully with a better network connection or something. So let's try it one more time, and if it doesn't work, we will give up. Also, there's a Trailhead module on Heroku Connect where you can actually walk through, get hands-on building a Heroku Connect app, deploying it on Heroku, and using the synchronization. So we maybe our network just flaked out or something. So we'll give it a minute to see. But any questions before we go on? Yep. So the way that Heroku Connect actually works is Heroku manages a service that uses OAuth and the REST APIs to talk to your Salesforce org, and it also uses the streaming APIs. In Heroku Connect, you can set up bidirectional syncing or unidirectional syncing, and you can do it either way. So for listening for Salesforce changes, you can either tell Heroku Connect to pull on an interval, or you can tell it to use the real-time API to listen to get changes and migrate them or copy them into the Heroku Postgres database. Yes, calling the REST APIs on Salesforce and the streaming API. Yep. No, application error. Bummer. All right, let's try it one more time. No. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about Heroku Connect, and then we'll do some questions. Okay, so bidirectional and unidirectional, you can set up the polling frequency. You can create a read-only copy as well. So if you don't want to write changes to the Postgres database back into Salesforce, you can set that up. So it's either direction or both directions. Real-time or near real-time for those, and scalable is a good thing because our Heroku Postgres database is running right next to our Heroku app. So really low latency connections between those two. It's SQL to that Postgres database, not SOCL. So for developers that already know SQL, that can be a great advantage for them. Yeah, so that's Heroku Connect. Okay, so one of the things that I use private spaces for with Heroku Connect is I can now, remember private spaces are that way to have our own Heroku and provide network isolation around them. Well, there's this cool feature in Salesforce where you can say only allow logins from certain IP ranges, right? And it's a good thing to do in an enterprise is lock down access to your Salesforce org. So you can actually, with Heroku private spaces, configure your IP ranges to include your private spaces IPs so that becomes part of your trusted network topology. And so that makes it so that it's a lot more secure than just letting these things be freely accessible on the network. And then you can also, from the Heroku side, control what can access the private space. So really nice when you combine private spaces and Heroku Connect to create the integration, but do it in a way where you maintain your network isolation. So we're actually doing this at Salesforce. I'm working on a project at Salesforce where we're doing exactly this, and we're doing it against our engineering org of Salesforce. So we've got something running on Heroku that needs to access Salesforce data, and we have really tight security constraints around accessing our own Salesforce orgs, and we're using private spaces as the way to protect that access and make it more secure. So it's a really useful combination of private spaces and Heroku Connect. Okay, so there, let's try one more time, and maybe the demo gods will let it work this time. We'll see. Hey, okay, great. Okay, so now we're going to walk through and set up Heroku Connect. So first thing I'm going to do is set up a connection and say this is the database that I want you to use on Heroku. So now it's going to go provision the new connection. Now it's going to ask me about my Salesforce instance. I'm going to say, let's authorize a connection. So now I'm over on Salesforce going through the OAuth flow, where now I have to specify what login as a user. So let's log in here as that user. And in this case, I've already installed the DreamHouse unmanaged package into this org in Salesforce. So it's already going to have that DreamHouse data in it. And next thing we need to do is create a mapping. So the mapping tells us what Salesforce objects to synchronize to the Heroku Postgres database. So hopefully things continue to work so you can see at least one mapping. But if this doesn't work, that's okay. You can go to that dreamhouseapp.io and you can walk through it on your own as well. So sometimes it takes a minute to query my Salesforce objects, depending on how many I have and that sort of thing. But when I create a mapping, I'm just selecting the fields in the Salesforce object that I want to synchronize. So let's go pick an object like property. So that's my custom object for the properties in DreamHouse. And it's going to go fetch my fields. Now I can specify the parameters for synchronization. So in this case, I'm going to say, yep, listen on the streaming API, write changes back to Salesforce. And now I can go through and select the different fields that I need in my app on Heroku. So let's go select those. Sure, let's do longitude and latitude. Picture, price, state, status, thumbnail, title, zip. Okay, and save that. So now what you see is that Heroku Connect is altering my database, my Postgres database. So it's setting up the tables on that database, and then it's going to synchronize the data I have in Salesforce into that Postgres database. So we'll try to, we have 2 more minutes, I think. We'll try to finish setting up this so we can see it all working. So the next one is that we have favorites. Okay, so let's go synchronize our favorites data here. That's property and user. Okay, and then let's add one more. And this one is going to be our, we have our broker is our last one. Again, we'll listen and synchronize those changes. We'll select the fields that we need here. And picture, phone, title for the broker, and hit save. Okay, so now it should be synchronizing that data all down to the database. You can come in and see the status. You can see any sync errors that happen, conflicts, those sorts of things. So the console becomes the way to see that. Okay, so now my data is synchronized. Last thing I need to do is go over to my app on Heroku. This is my production app. And my app was been programmed to look to see if we're connected to Salesforce or not on startup, and so I just restarted the app so that now this time it should see, all right, we're connected to Salesforce, and then we should now this time be getting the data from Salesforce. So let's go open up that production app again. Remember, I didn't finish moving that change all the way to production, the one that I'd made, so we're still back at the welcome page, but let's go check out the properties. Okay, great. So there we've got our list of properties. Looks the exact same as before, but now this data is pulling from Salesforce, and to verify that, let's go log into Salesforce and make a change in Salesforce, and then we should see that change reflected on our Heroku app. So let's go to our properties and go to this 448 Hanover one. You'll see the price is $725. If we look back at our production app, we should see one in here that's $725. So Quiet Retreat is $725, right? So let's go change the price on that property to, let's do a fire sale. We're dropping it $25,000. So let's save that change. And then if we go over to our Heroku Connect dashboard, what we'll see happen is that it'll notice a change on property. So it'll see, all right, it's pulling Salesforce for changes. It should now see that change, and then we'll propagate that change to my Heroku Postgres database. And hopefully this all happens quickly since I'm over my time. Let's go give it a try here. Let's refresh this. Go back to our list of properties, and we should see that Quiet Retreat now is 700,000 instead of 725,000. So sure enough, we were connected to Salesforce and propagating that data across those systems. Okay, so that's Heroku Connect. To learn more, dreamhouseapp.io, the Heroku trailheads. You just go into Trailhead, search for Heroku. There's a number of great modules in there. And there's another great Heroku and Heroku Connect session tomorrow at 12:40. I'm out of time, I'm sorry, but I will be standing over there, and you can ask me questions or go down to the Heroku booth to learn more. Thank you so much for coming. I hope that was useful for you. Thanks.